Hi, I'm Andrea.
Hey, y'all, this is Courtney, and welcome to the Human Design and Liberation Podcast.
This is a space where we explore how human design and liberation theology intersect with the past, present, and future,
with the intent of sharing the beauty and pain of the human experience to encourage you in your liberation journey. Welcome back, everybody. Hey, girl. Hey.
Hey.
How are you?
I'm good.
Yeah.
Recovering.
The plague. It's been crazy, like health-wise. It's been tough.
Yeah. This has been a hard winter. I just think across the board, everybody is struggling. Yeah.
Yep.
I'm grateful to be back in the land of the living.
Me too. I'm grateful that you
Very
are
intense.
too.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. So I'm excited for today. I'm excited to talk about liberation and explore the roots of some of the things that I think are much more commonly discussed now. But anyway, it was interesting to me to dive a little bit deeper down the rabbit hole, the roots of liberation and what we come to think of it today.
Yeah, me too. Me too. It's so interesting how we're both like astrology buffs, and it feels like almost a similar trajectory where there were different parts of the world who began using this modality at the same time in their own way. And then when they finally met in the middle, it just grew the influence like exponentially.
I love it. One of the places we had talked about starting was really just exploring how each of us started in our liberation journey. And I can't wait to hear your story.
Yeah. So I mine started out as more of a racial identity development story. I grew up in the South, grew up in North Carolina in predominantly white spaces primarily, mainly because North Carolina is still incredibly segregated like you wouldn't believe.
Yeah.
And so you have to choose. There's very few places where you can be and it's just like naturally very diverse all the way around. And but that definitely informed how I felt about myself growing up. My family at the time also had a more conservative worldview. I grew up in the white evangelical church. I had a lot of internalized anti-Blackness. And that really didn't come to the fore until Trayvon Martin's murder in 2012. I mentioned in an earlier episode, but just the way that we were situated in our community, that could have easily been, I have 5 younger siblings, and that could have easily been one of them. It just was like seeing that story unfold felt like a nightmare because it really truly could have been one of them. It could have been me, but it certainly could have been one of my brothers. And that hit me in a way that I wasn't anticipating. I liken it to rose-colored glasses being shattered because it just had never, none of the things, none of the isms, none of the statistics or whatever had ever felt like it hit that close to home.
Yeah.
Even though we were fully living the Black experience in all of those, in so many different ways. There's just, I refused to see a lot of it. I was shielded from quite a bit of it. I'm a kid of the 90s. We really still had this colorblind philosophy, ideology where we truly believed that one day none of this would matter. So we don't need to even talk about it. We don't need to learn about it. We don't need to go deep into it because it's all going to disappear anyway. So at that point, I realized that like it's not disappearing, or it's not disappearing fast enough for me to not educate myself.
Yeah.
And I started educating myself from that point forward. My mom got me this book. I believe it was the Phenomenal Rosa Parks, I think is what it's called. I will definitely put it in the show notes. But that got me on my journey of understanding what it took to get us where we are, and also how those individuals, especially those who lived their life into the 21st century, really think about the progress that we've made. You know what I mean? Are they really proud of the progress that we've made? Is this what they anticipated? Is this what they want for us? Do they want more for us? Is this all there is? And that led me to reading a lot of other incredible books about Coretta Scott King. I read Frederick Douglass's Slave Narrative, which is outstanding, especially his commentary on the white church. And then Ta-Nehisi Coates and Hannah Nicole Jones, two journalists that honestly inspired me to become a journalist and a writer. And sitting with that, years later, sitting with the murder of Michael Brown, I'm pregnant with my first baby. This was like, it radicalized me in many
Absolutely.
ways. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? It truly radicalized me, opened my eyes, and made me realize that I want more. I deserve more than what I'm experiencing.
Yeah.
It's not even time to even talk about colorblindness yet, because what the lived experiences of people don't align with the life that we should be experiencing in order to no longer talk about race. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
It's just very premature. And
I think, well, and we can get into this, but I think more than premature, I think that it was a tool. I think that it was
100%.
definitely a
100%.
tool of capitalism to try to distract.
Totally. Absolutely. Because even in the time that it was being spouted, like the Clinton era, that's the same era of Rodney King. That's
Yep.
the same era of the man who was murdered in the bar in San Francisco. And this is all the same time. And so it absolutely was a distraction. But I think underneath it, and this is where I think it gets to liberation, is like being a minority and being minoritized are two different things. Being a minority just means that there are not as many people with your identity as maybe with another. And that does not have to carry any sort of oppression with it. It's
Yeah.
actually quite objective. But minoritization, being minoritized, of course, yeah, there are minorities. There's always going to be people, a smaller group of people among a larger group of people, identity-wise. But to be minoritized, to be made smaller, to be treated less than another group of people, to have less access, less respect, less mobility, that's wrong. That is unethical. That is inhumane. And that's what we've made these two things the same. We've made minority and minoritization the same in our society.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, when like how liberation comes in and says, wait, there are differences among us, yes. But does that mean that we should have different levels of access? Does that mean that we should be treated with different levels of respect in society? Does that mean that we have different levels of mobility?
Or even just like
Absolutely
different
not.
levels of worth, right? Of inherent worth.
Yes, absolutely. That does not mean that. And so I feel like when I came across Dr. James Cone, which was my first real introduction to liberation theology, my husband bought his book for Christmas one year. It was a breath of fresh air because I love God. I love Jesus. I don't know if I call myself a Christian, but I do admire and want to emulate how the Jesus of the Bible treated the people around him.
Yeah.
There's something totally radical about that. And James Cone was the first person I came across who actually captured that and didn't brush it to the side or make it fairy tale like, but made it
Yeah.
actually applicable to the world that we all actually live in, and the experiences we're all actually experiencing. And I've never seen theology brought into the present in that way. And that was a huge blessing for me because I was like almost out. I was
Yeah.
like almost done
Yeah.
with all of it. and finding him and then finding womanist theology, which I think is even richer
Yeah.
and in a
Yeah.
lot of ways and more of a blessing for me personally. Yeah, I'm like, okay, I can get down with this because it's real. It's like eyes wide open.
Yeah.
I
Well,
don't
and
have to
I mean,
ignore anything to be able to still have my faith.
absolutely. And in fact, not ignoring anything makes your faith stronger
Yes.
because the watered down version of theology that is popularized today,
Mhm.
again, it's a tool. It's not the truth.
Yep.
And so it is a tool to keep people toiling, keep people with their head down, keep people not aware of the ways that they are
Mhm.
being conditioned and manipulated. And so
Yep.
once you start to take that wool from your eyes, then you can take your power back.
Yes. Yes. Oh, how about you, Andrea? I'm
Mhm.
super interested. I think I've heard a little bit of this, but not the whole thing, so I'm excited.
Yeah, I think you have too. It's interesting because in a lot of ways we had opposite experiences growing
Mm.
up. I also grew up in the South, but I grew up in the middle of urban Atlanta and in a time period when desegregation policies were still very much practiced. And so what that looked like for me was very integrated schools. Our schools, we had a program called M to M, which was majority to minority. And it was set out to take kids from areas where they were in underfunded schools, primarily Black schools, and bring them to better funded, quote unquote, white schools. And the whole goal was this 50-50, was making each school 50-50. Um,
Wow.
so that was in the 80s and 90s. It even went to the Supreme Court my last
Wow.
year of elementary school. And yeah, there was quite a lot of pushback from the white residents.
Mm.
But honestly, it was the best thing that ever happened to me. It was, I think, an opportunity to grow up in a cultural epicenter and really experience culture, which
Wow.
is not every native Atlantan's experience. I grew up during the time of Freaknik and major cultural experiences. And I was obviously very young, so I was sheltered, but it was a very real and raw time in this
Mm.
city. And I think also a major role were the teachers that I had because there was not only representation for students, but there was also representation for teachers and administrators. And as we were doing our homework for this episode, I was just thinking of the many incredible Black women who poured into me as
Mm.
a young, very impressionable projector child
Yes.
who
Oh.
was just soaking it all up. So that was really the foundation that I had. And I left my high school in 97. And again, 50-50 representation. I was involved. I played basketball with a majority Black team. I was on drill team
Mm.
with a majority Black drill team. And
I
I was
need
fully
pictures.
immersed. You need pictures?
Yes, I know that was so cute. I can just see it in my head, and I know they loved you, and I know you loved them. Oh, I
I
just think
had
it's
sequins, all the sequins,
oh my
big sweepy
god.
sleeves and the big bombed.
Yeah. Oh,
Oh
so
man, we had
cute.
fun. We had a lot of fun. The other day there was this reel of like songs that are turning 40 or 30, I think 30. And one of them was
Mhm.
Tootsie Roll. And we danced in the gym in front of the entire school.
Of
The video of it.
course. Oh my
um,
gosh, I love that.
yeah, so that really paints a good understanding of my foundation. And at the same time, we were all asleep. to
Yeah.
the realities that Black bodies were experiencing. And
Mm,
so that wake up for me started again with Trayvon Martin. I
mm,
had come back to Atlanta from Mexico. I had been living in Mexico working for a large multinational corporation for many years. I had been in Mexico for 6 years at that point, and I had been with the corporation for almost 10 or right at 10. And I think that the realities of how my Black friends and colleagues were making it seem like things weren't as bad as they were. And yeah, it blew the discussion open in a way that hadn't ever been. It just hadn't ever been. And I think that was scary for a lot of my Black colleagues, but it also gave them a sense of righteousness, of clean righteousness, of this is the reality that we've been living in, and
yeah.
releasing shame and releasing any kind of blame that they might have had towards themselves. And to your point, with everything that happened in Ferguson after that, I think it was really when we started to see the influence that social media would have on our understanding of the systems
Yes.
that we're living in.
Absolutely.
That was when I started to find many of my teachers as well. And when I read Bell Hooks for the first time, or
Mm,
many years later, I found Malagros Phillips, who talks about healing racism and just really learning the roots of where these ideas come from. It just blows the fallacy wide open. And I guess because I'm so highly sensitive, like I can really smell it out from a mile away, the
same.
anti-Blackness and the ruse. The other interesting thing that definitely plays a role is the number of years that I was in Mexico and just
Mm,
the experiences that I had in India and in Europe and in
mm,
other parts of Latin America. We have this idea that racism only exists in the US. And it was just really
yes.
cool as you were unearthing some of the liberation theology roots that there are really deep roots in Latin America. And it
Hmm.
doesn't surprise me in any way, shape, or form because the Spaniards who really created the systems that we know in this part of the world, they colonized Latin America
Yes.
first. And the caste system and the economic warfare of taking all of the money out of these countries, which they weren't really countries at the time, they were more just like geographic regions, right? That all started with the Spaniards. It is stark and has the exact same roots of anti-Blackness.
It really does. It is. It's so shocking to see how, yeah, these two modalities rising up and literally saying the same thing,
Hmm.
called different things, but saying the exact same thing because the experiences are exactly the same. And
Yeah,
anyone who understands the transatlantic slave trade understands that the experiences, by and large, are incredibly similar.
yeah,
And you could probably speak to almost to this day, but there are still incredible similarities between what Afro Mexicans, which just received a designation for the first time on the census in 2018 or something like that,
yeah, yeah.
and other Latin Americans of African descent and how they're treated. You talk about minoritization, it's not even
Oh, yeah,
recognition.
no, it's not a lot to unpack and heal in that realm. So
Yes.
that kind of brought us together because we have a common colleague, Rebecca Baruchi, who
Yes.
really is the reason why we ended up finding each other. And Bex just does such a great job of elevating Black and brown voices in the space and disrupting and creating new systems that are allowing us to hear straight from those who have been dreaming about what's possible for longer than any of us can imagine.
Yes. Yes. And I think that's really, I don't know about you, but I think that's the part about liberation studies and liberation theology that really captured me
Mm,
because it was beyond describing the problem. It was beyond like of giving it a name. This is real. This is a problem. Yes.
yeah,
And this is this prescription. Like this is the antidote to that. This is what we can build instead that heals us and cures us of these systems of oppression that are killing us all. Like not
yeah,
just one group of us, not just a minority, not just the target, but all of us as a
yes,
species are being undermined by these systems. That I think that was like the big thing. I don't know about you.
yeah, yeah. I think the fact that it's a spiritual affliction, when
Mm,
you look at the roots, and I think that was why Milagros Phillips, her work really was probably the biggest turning point for me of turning from the affliction to the cure. And her book, Cracking the Healer's Code, I highly recommend to everyone who is in this space, along with Reshma Minikin's work, My Grandmother's Hands, who
mhm,
I found out
mhm.
later the two of them have worked together. Reshma
Of
actually
course.
wrote an endorsement for her book. So, of course, they have. But really recognizing the spiritual affliction of Western Europeans and in
Yes.
the time frame directly predating the transatlantic slave trade was a time frame of just many hundreds of years of war and death and plague
Wow.
and just really treating each other absolutely horribly. I just
Mm,
finished reading a historical fiction novel that takes place during that time. And every time I read about the 1400s to 1300s, that time frame, I'm just really shaken by the depravity and the absolute
mm,
horrors that they were doing to each other. Just like inhumane, just
yeah.
absolutely horrific. This particular book was about England during that time and brothers killing their
Yeah.
brothers, like just their brothers' children, like just, oh God,
Mm,
it's awful. It is
yeah.
absolutely awful. So if
Totally
they're treating
depraved.
each other that way, then
Right.
how are they going to treat somebody that they don't perceive as the same as them? And
Yeah.
you start to see where the seeds of the horrors are, where they come from. So, yeah, this idea of recognizing where the spiritual illness comes from
Mm,
and really grieving what needs to be grieved,
yes.
really like allowing yourself to go there to grieve. Because even if, like in your case, for example, you don't have as many ancestors, you probably have some because we all have some from the whiteness.
It's
Um,
true. That is true. I've seen it. I've seen my ancestral DNA, and it is like a good 20%, 18 to 20% European descent. So they are there.
they are there. And just like recognizing the proliferation and influence that
Yeah.
these really depraved people had over modern populations, way more than
Yes.
I think we really have ability to grasp.
Yes. Yes. And I want to point out because you said it, I think, in a conversation that we had, but it's coming to mind this idea of there was a time thousands of years, actually, where there was a check on that. There always seemed to be a check on that. And that was spirituality. Like
Yes.
spirituality, mysticism was an entity outside of government,
Yeah.
an entity almost outside of, the throne, whatever
Yeah.
the throne was, a chief or whoever it was, to be a type of a check on the power of that person. Because here's the thing about human design that I love to bring it back in, is that there is no denial of difference. There's
Right.
no denial of like different roles, different ideas on what it means to survive and thrive as a human being, different
In a
belief
lot of
systems,
ways,
all these things.
that's the point, right? Like
Yes,
differentiation
exactly.
is the point of human design. So yeah, for sure. It doesn't deny. And it also like opens up our understanding of the range that these energies have. So
Yes.
a couple of things come to mind when you're talking about this. When we're talking about the feudal system or the system that these ancestors were living in, very much governed by energy of gate 45, which is
Mm,
manifestor energy. It's
yes.
part of the channel that moves from the heart center to the throat. And that gate is the gate of rulership. It is literally like
Ah,
the
yes.
archetypal gate of the king, right? Or the queen. But that gate is in relationship to the gate of control, which is the gate that comes off the heart center. And control
Mm,
keeps rulership in balance. And what you learn about in human design is that gate 45, it's the gate of the gatherer. It is the one who has this magnetism to bring resources to them to redistribute
yes.
and keep their kingdom safe, to redistribute and make sure that
Wow.
their kingdom is flourishing. And when the kingdom is not flourishing because they're holding on to too much power, then the kingdom will take the power back.
Mm,
And that is exactly what was happening in these feudal times, right?
mhm.
The whoever was in power was very much dependent on the wider population being happy with their leadership.
Right.
The other check and balance and I think this is the one that we've talked about, is the role of the six line. And
Mhm.
when you're looking at profile and you have this fifth line energy that is very much the leadership archetype,
Yes, yes.
the royalty in the upstairs window and the house analogy for profile. And the sixth line is the sage, is the mystic that is that ruler's right hand person, and that
Right.
people look to make sure that the ruler is actually saying objective truth, because the sixth
Right.
line is focused on objective truth. And so having a sixth line next to them as a ruler gives them some measure of credibility, gives them some measure of accountability, because the
Right.
sixth line is not interested in the politics and all of the shenanigans that, the fifth
Right.
line might be up to.
Absolutely. It's almost like a lookout, but the lookout it's not a lookout just for the king. It's a lookout for everyone.
Right. For the kingdom. Yeah.
Yeah.
Kingdom, as my
I love
church
that.
likes to call it, the kingdom. Yeah.
I
I like
love that. Yes.
it.
And yeah, absolutely. And so during that time of feudalism, maybe before that, I think you can clear this up, but there was this usurping of that spiritual power, or like the
Yes.
consolidation of power,
Consolidation. Yeah.
where where the king became also the spiritual leader, or
Yeah.
the spiritual leader became literally under the rulership of the king, as opposed to they are the ones that have the they are expressing the intentionality of spirit, and the king is carrying out the will of spirit for the benefit. Does that make like
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
distinction, carrying out the will for the benefit of the kingdom? But then that became such that the king, especially I'm thinking like England, the Church of England kind
Oh,
of
yeah.
thing.
For
Priest was
that, but yes.
it was definitely, yes, but
Yeah.
definitely became it's almost like they became a spokesperson, if you will. The spiritual leader, the religious leader became the ones that sold the plan of the king to the people instead of having its own outside like check. It was like,
Yeah.
okay, I can get them on my side. And I think of, for the United States, I think of Billy Graham and the
Mm,
Rockefeller family. I think
mm.
about
Oh,
that
yeah.
during the Great Depression, the 20s, the turn of the century, where the church of the time became this mouthpiece for the ruling class.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and the, like, ordained nature of the ruling class. I think that
Mm,
those are both examples of how spirituality or what our ancestors knew of as spirituality. I don't even know that you could
yeah.
necessarily call the Catholic Church at that time very spiritual because it wasn't.
Right. That's very
It
true.
was very power oriented. But, you know, the saddest part is that wasn't what Jesus taught at all. And so when the Romans colonized Christianity, they really saw it as power play. They really saw it as a way
Mm,
to take power back, that this super influential movement that was happening. And then there was their own religious structure prior to that was based on planets, that was based on the solar system. It
right.
was based on these influences and Saturn being the ultimate ruler of,
Right.
that system that they had prior. And so they carried this archetype of scarcity and condemnation and a lot of
Mm,
very harsh rules that they had from their Saturnian temples into what we now know of as the Catholic Church. And a lot of the festivals that they celebrated, they basically renamed, right? Even
mm.
Christmas was a rebranding of
Right.
Saturnalia.
Wow.
There was no there was no recognition of the root of some of these practices. And
Right.
when we see how Rome was really trying to hoard power and hoard
Mm,
resources, they really did become their own like kingmakers, right? Because they were the ones who came
right.
in and put the crown on the king's head. It was the archbishops and these dignitaries that were designated from Rome, and how much power you were allowed to amass. You had to get permission
Mm,
from Rome, and it was all dictated by how much power you gave to them, by how much money you gave to them. It had nothing to do with any kind of morality or spiritual alignment. And not to say that everyone in the system participated that way, but the people who
exactly.
had power all participated that way. And that just deepened this experience of scarcity that
Right.
the population was having, made them so much easier to control. And
Yeah.
the types of torture and death that anyone who believed in their own sovereignty was put to was intended to scare people, was intended, and that was
To
the end
frighten
result,
them.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. To make them captive, to make them
Yeah,
captive to this new way. And so this is definitely the faith, the Christianity that
yeah.
was foisted upon these indigenous peoples from Africa, from what is now Latin America,
Even
what
from
is
Europe,
now the
right?
United
Like,
States.
they went through the
Right.
same process, all of it,
Where? I'm sorry.
in Europe.
Oh, of course, yes. Europe definitely being first.
Yeah,
And then I was thinking like fast forward into the transatlantic slave trade, fast forward, even Christopher Columbus, all of that.
Yeah.
This is the Christian, this is a Christianity, quote unquote, that was brought to the New World. This is what I was taught in the churches that I attended, was taught to celebrate that the gospel was being brought to these places. And anyone who knows what the gospel means, like what that word is supposed to mean, it very much is not that. And so
Yeah.
I want to fast forward a little bit to the 20th century and the 1960s, when liberation theology is becoming a, like, kind of solidified theology, as opposed
Yeah.
to, it was always brewing. Like, the Black church always had liberation roots.
Yes.
That needs to be said. But when this became like a true school of thought, like a solidified study,
Yeah.
was in the 1960s in Latin America and also in the United States. And that was what I felt like coming away was the goal, was to reclaim the gospel for the people.
Reclaim the spiritual roots, right? Reclaim
Yes,
the truth of the spiritual roots, not the distortion that had been proliferated for so long.
exactly. Exactly. Oh,
And even
I
when you
feel
look
like,
at MLK and his writings and the things that he knew to be possible, what was so subversive about him was how grounded in theology his ideas were.
yes,
Right?
100%. Yeah, he was a scholar. I
Yeah,
feel like we don't spend enough time talking about that. And
we
I would
don't.
say that about Malcolm X too. These are individuals who are brave and revolutionary and all these things, Angela Davis included, but they were also highly intelligent, very well read, very well studied over a broad array of studies and books and philosophies from different generations, different parts of
Modalities.
the world,
Absolutely.
modalities. These were not, I just feel like part of what has been lost, besides their radical nature, is just the, their intellect has
Yeah.
been neglected so deeply by the way that
Yeah.
we've whitewashed their stories.
Because
I
they
wanted to,
died
oh,
so
yeah,
young. Like they were
right.
so young. And I think that's the piece that is it's easy to distance ourselves from. But
Yeah.
this was recent. This was recent history. This is not
Yes.
ancient history. Like,
Yeah.
and Malcolm X was in his 20s. Like, he would definitely still
Mm.
be alive and well and teaching today if his life had not been cut short.
Yeah, I think he was like early 30s, 20s. Fred Hampton was 21, I believe, when he was assassinated. Martin Luther King was in his mid-30s.
Mid 30s,
Yeah.
baby. He was a baby.
We had found this really great quote to really define what liberation is. Like, it's like great summation around the definition of liberation. What does it mean? And I wanted to go ahead and read that now. So this is
Yes.
from a book called Leadership for Liberation, a leadership framework and guide for student affair professionals out of USC. And Jordan Harper and Adriana Kazar are the writers. And they also feature a couple other writers that are near and dear to our hearts, including Bell Hooks. But I wanted to read this now for you all. So, Bell Hooks defined individual liberation as a historical moment when one begins to think critically about the self and identity in relation to one's political circumstance. Collective liberation recognizes that all of our struggles are intimately connected and that the work of liberating the oppressed and the oppressor falls on everyone. Freire, Paulo Freire, for those of you who don't know, who's another incredible writer. And the thing about Freire is that he he was a huge inspiration for the entire liberation studies and liberation theology, psychology movement. So very important writer as well. But Furry reminds us that the oppressor is a victim in the cycle of oppression and is not free either. In the act of dominating, one is also stripped of their humanity. And so all of us remain in a cycle where we are not fully free or human. Hooks also writes, Bell Hooks also writes, until we are all able to accept the interlocking, interdependent nature of systems of domination and recognize the specific ways each system is maintained, we will continue to act in ways that undermine our individual quest for freedom and collective liberation struggle. It is the responsibility of all to participate in the unlearning needed to achieve systemic change. How does that hit you, Andrea? Like when I showed you this for the first time and I'm reading it again now, this amazing quote by Jordan Harper and Adriana Kazar and the array of writers that they feature in it.
I think that it really captures the essence of liberation as I have come to know it and to work for it. It is so deeply rooted in dehumanization, and not just dehumanization of an oppressed people, because in order to dehumanize them, you have to dehumanize yourself first. And so when we look at so many of the ailments and illnesses and challenges that the white community has comes directly from being an oppressor. When you look at the plethora of challenges that people are dealing with on a day-to-day basis, the root of them is the same as the challenges that the Black community is facing. And I love that they have woven that into their introduction to liberation, into what liberation leadership looks like, because so many people of European descent are in liberation from a saviorism perspective. And saviorism is really just another tool of the same oppressive system, right?
Yep.
It is a tool to release that conscious knowing of harm without actually getting to the root of the conscious knowing of harm, which is the dehumanization. When we can participate in liberation as a group that also needs liberation, then all of a sudden things start to really shift. And I think that's the reason why human design has been so powerful for me in my liberation journey, because it sheds light on these patterns and the conditioning and the seemingly good ideas that are actually keeping oppression in place.
Yes. Yes. The interference. It's the interference with another's trajectory under this misguided concept that only one of you can make it to the finish line.
Right. At the basis, there's lack mentality. At the basis, there is this fundamental scarcity that you're not going to survive.
Yeah.
Or
You said,
one of you is
I'm
not
going to quote
survive.
you. I'm about to quote you right now. The biggest threat, you talk about strategy and authority. So we're bringing human design into this.
Yeah.
And you said the biggest threat to strategy and authority is that seven-centered survival fear. Those closest to their community's oppressive forces are most harmed by this fear, and they're frozen in it. I feel like I needed to quote you in that moment because you were going there, and I wanted to make sure. I wanted to make sure the target was clear. I'm like, this is where we're going, Andrea. You are right there. Yes.
When people come to human design, we're all coming to try to live out our destiny. We're all coming to try to live out our best life. That's the point of being alive, right? And what that looks like now versus how that looked pre-1781, getting into just like some cosmology and the world really changed in 1781, and that's when projectors started to exist. And that is when
Mhm.
we shifted from being seven-centered, which is what the centers look like in the seven chakras, to being nine-centered, which is what our centers look like now. And the goal of being alive right now is communion and expression. The goal of being alive back then was survival and enlightenment. And so
Mm.
when we have these practices that have been around that predate that shift, we have to be really aware that the threads of survival are still woven into everything that was created pre 1781.
Yep.
And when we look at human design, which was created in the 80s, it is really purely based on communion and expression.
Yeah.
And so strategy and authority is really the mechanism that we have to live out that expression that's going to bump us up against all the conditioning that is keeping us from being in our fullest self. And so those structures that keep us in survival mode, capitalism, white supremacy, patriarchy, they are naturally going to interfere with your strategy and authority.
Right. Yes. Yes.
And we were even
Excuse
talking
me.
about before you got on, right? Of the
Mhm.
knowing that you had this weekend that you should not the eye roll
I'm tired, Andrea. I'm tired of these.
of just
I'm tired of
lear-
it. But no, go on.
learning
No,
and
it's true.
relearning, learning and relearning this lesson of the body knows. The answers are in your
Yes.
body. The body knows. But can the mind surrender to what the body knows and trust that you will be safe? Trust that you
Yes.
will stay alive if
Yes.
you listen to the body.
With the knowledge that this system is built on you not listening to the
Right.
so it's and that so this is I feel like this is where all these modalities meet for me is that we still live in a world where the seven-centered way, that survival and enlightenment is still the institutionalized way that we're being pushed forward in the West.
Right.
It's institutionalized inside of capitalism. It's baked in the cake of capitalism. It's baked in the cake of patriarchy. It's baked in the cake of all these things which branch out into racism and misogyny and anti-child behavior, anti-family behaviors, all of these things, anti-care, anti-environmental care and care of the earth, all of these things, right? This is the society that was developed out of that seven-centered way.
Right.
And it is still hegemonic. It still rules the top. Knowing this, and this is what's so powerful to me about liberation theology and human design and what they can do together, is that it acknowledges the fucked up system.
Yep.
And it says to us that it is real. And yes, there are going to be consequences. Yes, there are going to be all these things. But for you to live your destiny out, you have to resist this seven-centered way, to embody this nine-centered way, to live embodied
Yeah.
instead of your own fear script, like whatever seven-centered way is baked into your own mind under the influence of the larger societal way. So our
Right.
minds, like everything we've learned about life has been learned inside of the seven-centered reality, the seven-centered
Yeah.
society. And our minds have created all types of ways of responding to different situations that keep us safe inside of the seven-centered society,
Right.
so-called. There's no way
Right.
because it's
Right.
built against our safety. and are
Exactly.
thriving. But that our body or mind are like, how can I like just stay out of the way? How can
Right.
I just not be bad? How can I just get by? How can I just squeeze by in this life? And that's the type of life that our mind is set up for us to live. Human design shows us, liberation theology shows us that we are not built to live that life of squeezing by, that we are supposed to live a life of thriving, and that we have a more developed, more truthful script in our bodies.
Mm-hmm.
It was much harder for the 700 way to influence that script than it was to influence the script of here.
Right.
And that in order to live by that script, it's in our spirits and in our bodies, we have to, it's like these micro resisting behaviors that we have to develop,
Yeah.
like listening to the body and doing what the body says instead of what our mind tells us to do in these little ways. If I would have done what my body told me to do yesterday, it wouldn't have been pretty. It would
Yeah.
have fucked up a lot of plans. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? It would have been a bit of a mess. But I would have avoided some much larger issues
Yeah.
that I couldn't
Yeah.
see, that I
Yeah.
couldn't cognize,
Yeah.
because that's not the point.
Right.
My body's, you don't need to know what the threat is. It's not about assessing the threat. That's not
Yeah.
how you get through life. It's not about risk avoidance. That's not risk assessment. That's not how we are meant to live in this new evolved way. We can actually live by our bodies, and that puts us in harmony with this older, deeper, more developed script of living, this thriving.
Yeah. Yeah. And really, it's access to innate wisdom that has been around since the beginning of time.
Yes.
But that is the exact same wisdom that has been demonized and
Mm,
diminished since, at least since the last 2,000 years, but
yeah,
certainly longer because they learned it from somewhere too, right? Like
that's true.
they were not that creative to come up with it all on their own. The
That's
Romans,
so
they were
true.
not. Yeah. I think that the enhancement or the permission that human design gives us within liberation is it's really the opportunity to see that everything has a role. Homogenizing in any form is going to harm. Even if
Mm,
you're homogenizing to peace, it's going to harm. And that is a really tough pill to swallow.
that is,
So
yes.
recognizing that everything has a role, and that doesn't mean we have to like it. It doesn't mean that we have to think that it's appropriate or something to support, but
Mm,
and also recognizing that there is a conscious choice and there is a role being played out that on some level needs to be played out because it's being played out for
yeah,
no other reason.
true.
And so if we can work to get to that understanding, then we're no longer pushing up against that role. We're saying, okay, you're choosing this role, and our destiny is not changing as a result of this. And so,
Mm,
with you making this choice to harm, it's making us stronger, it's giving us fuel, it's allowing us to be clearer
mhm,
so
mhm.
that we're going to have more trajectory on our path, right? Because that's the only option.
That's really important. That's so important. Yeah, say more. That feels very important right now. So I feel so encouraged. So I'm like, I want to hear more. I love this.
I think that when you look at the tools that have been used to oppress, many of them have been tools to homogenize.
Mm,
Okay. And
yeah.
so a lot of the only thing that we know is homogenization. So when we look at, for example, our politics and how divisive things are right now, I'm a huge fan of Sharon McMahon, and she says things have always been divisive in this country. Like there has never been a moment where
Absolutely.
things were peaceful. And so if we can stop trying to convince other people
Mm,
to be like us, which is really just more
yes.
homogenization, okay?
Yes.
But we can look at, okay, what you're choosing creates harm, right? What you're choosing harms children who identify from a different sex than what they were born with. What you're
Mm,
choosing harms children who were born with darker skin than yours. What you're choosing harms the people who can't afford to live in the environmentally clean part of town. And so they're getting all of the environmental toxins, right? We can
yeah.
be really clear about what's happening, but and also recognize that harm that is harming those children is also harming the people who are choosing it.
Absolutely.
And so it's really just a matter of time before they wake up to their own harm. We just have to allow them to have their process, right? This is part of their liberation process is waking
Mm,
up to the harm that they're causing themselves, let alone everyone else. And
yeah.
so that role provides us with extreme clarity. If we didn't
Mm,
have people who were coming against us so hard, we wouldn't feel so clear and so compelled to fight for it. We wouldn't need to fight for it. It would
it's true.
still be, we would still be asleep to it. And that's what I mean by there being these roles within liberation that are not necessarily agreeable. They're not
Mm,
necessarily things that I would like for people to be doing. My neighbors, my
mm,
family members, people that are close to me, making choices that
yeah.
I very fundamentally disagree with. But when I can reframe it into there is a role here and not try to homogenize them, then there's
Right.
potential for them to be on their liberation journey. Because if I'm just trying to fight homogenization with more homogenization, I'm drinking the same poison.
I love that. Yes, it's so true. It's so true. There's its piece, intersectionality, which I think is very important. And I feel like it put the name or label to what you're saying.
Yeah.
And something that I would teach in my spaces, and I think it differentiated me possibly from some other teachers out there that I haven't mentioned, but everybody's work is important. Everybody's doing their role. But something that
Yeah.
was very important to me to express was the reality of intersectionality and the reality that we all have multiple identities, and that it was a way to illustrate exactly what you're saying about when you dehumanize someone else, you're dehumanizing yourself.
Yeah.
Because typically everyone holds multiple identities. And we live in a structure in the United States where there's really one supreme identity
Yeah.
that no one actually holds.
Nope.
That's the reality of it. That's the gag, is that no one holds the singular identity. And so we're all taught to claw our way into being more and more like, more and more aligned, and deeper relationship and identity that's not real, that doesn't actually exist in our society. And it's completely dehumanizing because what we're being called to do is shed, cut off parts of ourselves
Yeah.
in order to fit into this box. And once you get there, you realize there's nothing there. And so you've just
Yeah.
maimed yourself for nothing.
Yeah.
And that's what I see when I see people in the news. I've seen some really tragic stories of those who appear on the outside to be the embodiment of that chosen identity,
Yeah.
harming themselves, unaliving themselves,
Yeah.
doing, horrible things to themselves because it was revealed that they actually weren't who they said they were.
Yeah.
They aren't a part of that invisible elite class of people either. Because there's no
Yeah.
such thing. It's truly, there's no such thing. And so
Yeah.
to have a modality like human design and to have a philosophy, a study like liberation theology and psychology to tell us that, to just tell us that out the gate. And then scholars, Kimberly Crenshaw and others to say, no, friends, we are multitudes. We are
Yeah.
multitudes, and therefore we are the only way forward is to build a multitudinous reality. My friend Omishade Bernie Scott calls it a multiverse. We have to build a multiverse. And because that we are a multiverse.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's liberation to me. It's like we make room for people to walk out their destiny, their journey, like you were saying, because that's what I want.
Yeah. Yeah.
And now my journey's not pitted against another now. It's not in order to have the walk that I want to have, someone else can't. It's in order for me to have the walk that I want to have, everyone has to have the walk that they have.
Yes.
That's the only way. So yeah,
Yes.
so powerful.
Yes. And that's why we're here. That's why
Mm,
we're here. Being committed to this work and being committed to the journey despite the cost, despite
yeah,
the challenges that it brings, because it brings so much joy and freedom. There's nothing like being yourself.
it's so true. And
There's
to
nothing
witness
like that
other
feeling.
people being themselves.
Absolutely. And the irony is that you can't have true communion without authentic expression.
That's
And
it.
if we're not aiming for that, then we're aiming for a sad existence.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, this was good. This was
So
juicy.
good.
And we love to hear your thoughts. We'd love to hear
Yes,
your
please.
ideas. What would you like to hear more of? What questions arise? We're still early in all of this, and we might be introducing a lot of ideas and things and concepts that you've never heard of before. So we want to know. We want to know what you have questions about, what you want to hear more about, so we can provide that. Because we're game. We're game for all of
Yes, we're here for it.
it. Thank you so much for tuning into HDxLiberation Podcast. We hope you've gained valuable insights into human design and its role in building a life of peace, success, satisfaction, and wonder. If you've enjoyed this episode, please show your support by liking, following, and sharing our podcast on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform. Your engagement helps us reach more people who can benefit from this wisdom. For exclusive content and to join our thriving community, consider becoming a Patreon member. Your support allows us to continue exploring the depths of human design and its potential for life and community transformation. Stay tuned for more fun, thoughtful, and impacting discussions. Together, we're unlocking the path to a more liberated and authentic life. Thank you for being part of HDxLiberation Podcast.